Cher, what a woman. This is a picture that was taken a few years ago of her, 2021. She's in her 70s. She looks pretty good. You know, Cher isn't just a star. Cher is a blazing sun. Her career is the stuff legends are made of. Her life is the stuff great novels are made of. Here are a few Cher facts to sort of get us in the mood to know about Cher and who she really is. First of all, she and Barbra Streisand share a very interesting distinction. They are the only two women, female performers in the United States to have won a competitive Oscar for acting and had a #1 hit for singing. Cher has had a #1 single in the United States for decades, in the 1960s, in the 1970s, in the 1980s, in the 1990s. She holds the record for the oldest female artist to hit #1. And she holds the record for the longest running tour with the most money grossed. She's appeared on the cover of People magazine a total of 13 times. I find that interesting because People magazine is sort of the bellwether for whether you've made it or not, or whether you're still making it or not. Well, Cher certainly has. She's also had 4 Barbie dolls created in her likeness. That's another signal that she's still hot. 2001, Timeless Treasures Cher was released. And then in 2007, Blonde Ringmaster Cher was released. Notice what she's wearing, the little dolls. They're all Bob Mackie costumes that she actually wore to perform. This one is the 1970s Native American Cher, and this one is the 80s Cher. Both of those were released in 2007. Those Bob Mackie outfits helped make Cher's career. She was already beautiful, striking, talented as a singer, but she had a model's body, and that was a good thing. A surprising fact about Cher is that she actually delivered the eulogy at Sonny's funeral years after they had divorced. She celebrated her 79th birthday, May 20th of 2025. And this year she's performing live on a national tour called The Cher Show, and she's returning to Las Vegas for a residency, so she'll be doing performances nightly there. You know, you'd be hard-pressed to find any adult living today who hasn't heard of Cher. Some of you of a certain age cannot think of Cher without thinking of her sidekick, Sonny. A better question might be, or was he the sidekick? For years, Sonny and Cher were a duo, a couple, an unbreakable pair, and then they divorced, and it was a very ugly divorce. In many ways, Cher's relationship with Sonny was both the best and the worst thing that ever happened to her. It was not the only good or bad thing that happened to her, however. Let's discover the real Cher and see what keeps her performing. What better way to do that than to ask Cher herself? And so in a way we are, because the book that I use this time as the primary resource for this is her memoir, Part 1. It's only the first 30 years of her life. And remember, she's 79 in 2025. So it's not even half of her life yet. And yet she tells us in her own words what her life was like. It was published by Day Street Books. It was released in 2024, late November. New York Times said it's a testament to resilience. The Washington Post said utterly candid. And People said fabulous with heartbreaking honesty. Man, all 3 of those are true. Fair warning, Cher is Cher. Cher occasionally uses language that I'm not particularly happy she uses, but Cher is Cher. And so as she's recounting some of these things that happened in her life, and as she's remembering conversations, occasionally it'll be peppered with some words that might be difficult, but that's Cher. Goodreads.com has this to say about her memoir. After more than 70 years of fighting to live her life on her own terms, Cher finally reveals her true story in intimate detail in a 2-part memoir. Her remarkable career is unique and unparalleled. The only woman to top Billboard charts in 7 consecutive decades, she is the winner of an Academy Award, an Emmy, a Grammy, and a Cannes Film Festival Award. And she's an inductee to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And she's been lauded by the Kennedy Center honors. With her trademark honesty and humor, Cher Memoir Part 1 traces how this diamond in the rough succeeded with no plan and little confidence to become the trailblazing superstar the world has been unable to ignore for more than half a century. All of that is true. All of that is true. Emma Brooks did a book review in December of 2024, shortly after this memoir Part 1 came out, and she wrote, Cher is, quote, a fun companion on a journey that beneath the jolly exterior contains a lot of dark and frightening episodes. Cher describes her family origins in the backwoods of Missouri, where her great-grandfather Isaac worked on the railroad and her grandmother Linda was sent to relatives because her family couldn't afford to keep her. Linda met a man named Roy Crouch. In 1926, she gave birth to Cher's mother, Jackie Jean. Linda was 13 years old. It was a bad start and went mostly downhill from there. Resilience is in my DNA, Cher writes, and you believe it. This memoir covers the time from Cher's birth until right at the beginning of her successful motion picture career. She's not 30 years old. The book was not easy to write. Cher says that it went through 7 years of rewrites. Something like 3 or 4 ghostwriters were fired. But somehow the story that Cher tells reads as authentic. She tells about the struggles that she faced as a child, as a teenager, and as a young married woman. This truth is sometimes difficult to read, but it will more often than not bring a smile to your face. Cher is funny, naturally so. That sense of humor has saved her throughout her life. One moment that I remember reading that I thought was especially appropriate when she was just married to her second husband, Greg Altman. They had not been married a week yet. And a friend of theirs came into her and said, Cher, do you know Greg is divorcing you? And she said, not sure, hum a few bars. That's the way Cher was. That's the humor that saved her. Cher began her life named Sherilyn Sarkeesian. She was born May 20th, 1946 in El Centro, California. Her parents were Johnny Sarkeesian and her mother, Jackie Jean Crouch. And she had one half-sister who was born a little later, and her name was Georgiann. Her nickname was G. Cher writes, the women in my family rarely chose their men well. Much of this personal memoir is told in a series of understatements like that one. Cher's mother, Jackie Jean, changed her name many times, some because of marriage, some because of divorce, some on a whim, so that by the time she died at age 96 in 2022, she was named Gloria Holt. Cher's mom married and divorced 7 times, twice to Cher's father. She had experienced a very difficult childhood of her own, and she often told Cher stories about how bad it had been for her. Cher writes that her mother would, quote, win the misery Olympics with something like, did you ever sing on the top of a bar for 16 cents when you were 5? Or, did your dad ever try to gas you in your sleep? Both happened to her mother. Cher's father, interesting character. His name is John Paul Johnny Sarkeesian. He abandoned Cher and her mother when Cher was just a toddler, so she had no memory of him when she was a baby. Cher did meet him, though, when he came around for a second time, and she was 11 years old. He was married to Cher's mother from 1946 to 1947 and again from 1965 to 1966. He was a businessman and a pretty good businessman, but he had problems with alcohol and he had problems with gambling, and that created a problem for him and for the little family he was trying to start. He worked sometimes as a truck driver, but most of the time he was working in clubs. Jackie Jean Crouch met Johnny when she was 17, and not too long after they met, they eloped to Reno, Nevada. At age 19, Jackie Jean was pregnant, and she considered an abortion, but she decided against it. Johnny moved to New York to find work and left Jackie Jean in Scranton, Pennsylvania, working a late shift at a diner. They had to board Sherilyn in a Catholic home. When she tried to retrieve her child, Jackie did, the church said that Jackie should put her up for adoption. There was no way that she would be able to take care of a child. She divorced Johnny in Reno. Cher's childhood was difficult, punctuated by jumps that went from poverty to security and back to poverty and then security again, stretches, so there was no stability in her life. When she was just a baby, of course, the dad had abandoned her and put her mother in terrible straits, trying as a single mother to get her child back in her own care and to be able to care the child properly. The fact that the nuns did not want Cher to be turned back to her mother is a pretty strong indication of just how poor Jackie Jean really was. Let's take a look at her husbands. As I said, she had 7, one twice. Husband number 1 was the one we've met, Johnny Sarkeesian, Cher's dad. Husband number 2 was Chris Alcade. Husband number 3 was John Southall, Georgiann's father. Husband number 4 was Joe Collins. Husband number 5 was Gilbert LaPierre. Husband 6 was a rerun, Johnny Sarkeesian. And then husband number 7, Hamilton Holt. And it's Holt's last name that Georgia finally settled on as her last name. With one biological father twice, plus 5 stepfathers, Cher's family life was pretty challenging. She was often left in the care of babysitters, sometimes her grandparents, so that her mother could earn some money and keep them together. She had to find ways to entertain herself. She loved to run around outdoors, almost always barefoot. She really didn't care for shoes. Even as an adult, she doesn't care for them. One way that she chose to entertain herself was to create imaginative friends. She writes in Memoir Part 1, I invented invisible friends that only I could see. Being the peculiar kid I was, I came up with Sam and Pete, 2 stubble-faced lumberjacks truck drivers in jeans, plaid Pendleton shirts, and hats with flaps over their ears, though they didn't always wear their hats. They lived under the lemon tree in the backyard of Mama and Pa's house and dwarfed me with their presence. They were 100% real in my mind. I find this interesting that they were truck drivers as well as lumberjacks, and remember her biological father for a time was a truck driver. She turned out not to be lonely her entire childhood, though. Her second stepfather, John Southall, provided an oasis of security for Cher that lasted about 5 years. Southall was the stepfather who brought into the family Georgiann, a baby sister born to Jackie. Although the transition from only child to big sister wasn't easy, Southall somehow made it easy. All the attention was on this newborn, and no one except Southall noticed Cher's sadness. Cher writes, "The day G arrived, I felt like yesterday's news. John Southall made me feel seen for the first time, and it was he who helped me grow to love G, even though I lost my treasured place as the only child." Southall and Cher's mom were married for 4 years before his drinking and the violence that was pretty predictable when he got too much to drink brought the marriage to a divorce. Cher writes that Southall was a mainstay for those formative years, from the time she was 4 years old until she was nearly 9. She writes, "Despite the violence and chaos that he brought into our lives, I forgave him. I still think of him as my dad. He really loved both me and G. I'm sorry my sister wasn't old enough to remember the good times. He was the first man I'd loved unconditionally, even though sometimes I was afraid of him. Losing him was more than painful. One day he was there and the next he was gone. I hadn't read the signs well enough to be prepared for the loss." Cher was always an adventurous child. She's still an adventurous person. When she received a tricycle for Christmas, she said that first set of wheels gave her the freedom to explore that she needed. As she grew, Cher was always having adventures. Once she talked a girlfriend into sort of kidnapping a horse that they saw in a pasture, and they rode a horse around a little bit until they got to a railroad track where they got off the horse, and Cher said, "Let's hop a train and go somewhere." And the little girl said, "Okay, we will." And so they did. This was less than a year after Southall had left. It was pretty interesting when she had to call her mother and tell her that she was in another city because she had hopped a freight car. Her mother was not amused. Cher was also frequently hurt trying out dangerous stunts. She writes in the memoir, "By the time I was 10, I'd had so many scrapes that my mother and Mama had a bet that I'd never make it to 21. I was in the ER so often, my mom wondered if she should just swing by there first on her drives home from work." Cher's mother was not just a serial marrier. She was an aspiring actress, a singer, and a part-time model. She was actually good at all three. Even with so many marriages, most of the time, Cher's memories are of just the moves, changing places that they were living, changing schools where she was attending, and the frequent bouts of poverty. Cher writes, "I remember going to school with rubber bands around my shoes to keep my soles on. But it wasn't always like that. We ate a can of stew or a can of beans one week, but then sometimes we lived in Beverly Hills." School was always difficult for Cher. She was embarrassed by her clothes, by her lunchbox contents. She would just have a sandwich and maybe an apple. If times were better, she might have a small bag of Fritos in there and a thermos of milk. But also her grades embarrassed her. She writes in the memoir, "School was never easy for me, though there were some good times. I loved drawing, sports, and history. I was really good at kickball, dodgeball, and handball, so all the boys wanted me on their teams. Still, I was the poorest student in class and often felt embarrassed and isolated. There was a time when we were so broke that my saddle shoes were literally falling apart and had to be padded with cardboard to stuff up a hole and wrapped with rubber bands to keep the soles from flapping. I begged Mom to let me stay home until she could afford new shoes, but she refused. Her mother, when faced with that, adopted the pattern of taking Cher to school and dropping her off when her teacher had her in sight. And that way she could be sure that this adventurous daughter wouldn't simply run away from school that day. She tried her best at her studies, but she just couldn't make the grades that she wanted to. I thought it was interesting that she really loved history. History is a memory bit of study. You have to remember what happened to see the importance of what's happening now. And so she had an incredible memory. And we knew that later when she became an incredible performer. It wasn't until decades after she was out of school and a married woman and a mother that her first child was diagnosed with dyslexia, and Cher realized that she too had that learning disability. She was always described as an extremely creative child. She loved making up plays, and then she would act out all the parts with a different voice for each character and different mannerisms for each character. She dreamed of being a star. The problem was her undiagnosed dyslexia put such limits on her education. As a preteen, she was crazy about Elvis Presley. I mean, who wasn't? She watched him on the Ed Sullivan Show and said later it was just like he was singing through the television straight to her. 2 years later, Cher's mom scored tickets for the two of them to see Elvis perform live. Cher describes it this way. The stage was dark, but when the spotlights hit him, Elvis was there and he was magic. There was a roar from the crowd that was like nothing I had ever heard. An explosion of flashbulbs went off. I only wished I'd brought our little Kodak brownie. Elvis was standing there in his famous gold suit, which was shimmering and changing color in the spotlights. It was the most exciting experience I'd ever had because I knew that I wanted to be on that stage in the spotlight one day, too. Kate Hogan did a very interesting piece for People in 2020. The title was Looking Back on Cher's Touching Photos with Mom Georgia Holt Through the Years. She writes, despite being mother to a larger-than-life daughter, Holt had her own fame too. Born in Arkansas in 1926, she eventually moved to Los Angeles and landed several film and television roles. From the 1950s, Watch the Birdie to I Love Lucy. She also made appearances on The Mike Douglas Show and The Merv Griffin Show in 1979 and 1980. Eventually, she released her debut album, Honky Tonk Woman, in 2013, which she had recorded back in the 80s. Cher writes, I mean, geez, my family, you couldn't make it up. Because her mother was a part-time model, Cher decided that maybe she could do some modeling too. This photograph is her first publicity photo for modeling, and you can see she's really quite pretty. She's 15, but she's pretty. It was during this year, when she's 15 years old, that she meets actor Warren Beatty by accident. She was driving her current stepfather's car and was nearly hit by another car, and the driver of that car was actor Warren Beatty, whom she recognized immediately. He was so sorry that he had frightened her and they nearly had an accident. He invited her home and he gave her cheese and crackers and then invited her to swim, and she didn't get home until 4 o'clock the next morning. Her mother immediately grounded her. The next day, Beatty called and asked her if she'd like to go out to dinner and go for a swim. She explained to him that she was grounded. So he asked to speak to her mother. He spoke to Georgia. Georgia realized who it was, and Cher was immediately ungrounded because Georgia wanted to meet Beatty desperately. When Cher was 16, she dropped out of school. She was in Los Angeles. She was pursuing her dream of becoming a star. She took acting lessons, and she worked odd jobs to make money to live. Her acting coach puzzled her at first because he didn't really pay very much attention to her. And when she started to quit lessons, he called her in and he said, "You've got real talent. I don't have to do anything with you. You're doing it yourself." And he said, "I'm trying to find some parts for you to read, but at the moment there just are no parts that seem right for you," a 16-year-old. A major impediment to her, though, when she would go to the few places he was able to place her, she couldn't read the scripts. The dyslexia got in the way. She was facing homelessness from lack of work when she met Sonny Bono. She was looking for another adventure, and she found one. She was sitting in a coffee shop with some friends when some people in the coffee shop around her started calling out, "Hey, Sonny, come sit with us." And she turned around expecting to see a tall, handsome man. It's not what she saw. In Memoir, Part 1, she writes, "I turned to take a look, and an intriguing stranger with a Caesar-style haircut walked towards us. He was wearing a black mohair suit, a mustard shirt with a heavily starched white collar, and a tie that matched his shirt. On his feet, he was wearing Cuban boots with heels, the first I'd ever seen, though later the Beatles would be wearing boots just like them and calling them Beatle boots. I swear to God, it was Maria and Tony in West Side Story. Everyone else in the room faded." In 1962, 16-year-old Cher meets 27-year-old Salvatore Philip Bono. He was an aspiring songwriter. In fact, some of his songs had been recorded by the Righteous Brothers and Sam Cooke. He was working at the moment, sort of promoting records to DJs, records with his songs on them. Sonny had recently become estranged from his wife, Donna, and their daughter, Christy, and he was moving into the same apartment building that Cher was about to have to leave. She writes, "Sonny definitely caught my attention. I was always interested in fascinating people because those were the kind of people I grew up around. He was in his 60s. He was the 60s version of my mom's friends. It wasn't love at first sight. I just thought this guy was special." Over the 2 weeks between when she was going to have to move back home because she couldn't pay her part of the rent with her friend, and Sonny was getting moved in since he had left his wife, they became friends. And Cher finally told him in tears that she was going to have to move back to her mother's house, and there was nothing she wanted to do less. He invited her to move in with him, so if she would cook and clean. He said he had twin beds, and he didn't find her particularly attractive anyway. He didn't realize for some time that she was underage. He just knew that she needed a place to live while she pursued her dream of becoming a star. Until one day, Sonny came home while she was cleaning the apartment, and she was singing loudly along with the radio. It was the first time he had heard her sing. He had no idea that she could sing. He quickly went to work finding work for her. Sonny found Cher work as a session singer. She sang backup vocals with success. She sang backup on Be My Baby by the Ronettes and You've Lost That Lovin' Feeling by the Righteous Brothers. Sonny was busy writing songs, trying to sell them, and singing a little backup himself. Over time, they discovered that Cher's very strong and unusual contralto voice blended well with Sonny's tenor. Both of them continued recording or trying to record solo, but Cher's career found its first big success when she and Sonny recorded I Got You, Babe. That song, written by Sonny, would become the couple's theme song for the rest of their time together. Over time, Cher's mother discovered that Cher was not a stewardess living with other stewardesses, but was living with an older man trying to break into show business. Mom was not amused. When the two first performed together, Sonny and Cher, they named themselves Caesar and Cleo and went nowhere. In 1965, they recorded Sonny's Baby Don't Go as Sonny and Cher for the first time. That clicked. Then came Bono's I Got You, Babe, and they were off. One thing that I did not know until I read her memoir was that Cher was extremely stricken with stage fright. She was uncomfortable. She wanted to be a star, but she was very frightened when she was on stage to perform. To calm her nerves, she started singing Looking at Sonny when they sang together, and that calmed her down. And if you'll look at some of the pictures through their career together, she most often is singing Looking at Sonny. From 1966 to the end of the 60s, they had notable successes, including recording Little Man and The Beat Goes On, both of them written by Sonny. Sonny also tried to do filmmaking, but with no real winners. They sang on primetime network music shows like Hullabaloo on NBC and Shindig on ABC. And by the end of that decade, they decided maybe they needed to do a variety show and do it in Vegas to see if they could boost their careers. Their success with that live variety show in Vegas led to the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour, which earned them 4 Emmy nominations. From 1971 to 1974, that Comedy Hour was great. Both as a duo and Cher as a solo artist were nominated for Grammys, but neither won. Cher would win her first Grammy in 2000. Sonny never won one. Cleveland Amory, TV Guide columnist, noticed the show and particularly Cher. He wrote in February of 1972, "Is there anything she can't do? She can sing any song, do any skit, wear any clothes, and frankly, we'd tune in if all she did was to sing that VAMP song every week." The show was a definite hit. What they discovered was, as hosts, they made a very good team. This is kind of a follow-through from their variety show when they discovered that they could do banter back and forth. Their guests ran the gambit. Their second season with the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour, they had California Governor Ronald Reagan and the Jackson 5 as their special guests. 1973, they went to the Academy Awards. Sonny never won an Academy Award. Cher won an Academy Award for Best Actress many years later for Moonstruck. But there was much more to this love story than most people knew. In 1971, it was becoming clear that their careers were taking different directions. Cher's success was eclipsing her husband's efforts. You know, Cher was the younger of the two by 11 years. She came to Sonny when she was still a very young girl, 16. She was independent, but she was very immature. She carried trauma from her childhood, and she really desperately wanted to find her own path. Most of all, she had no self-confidence, even though she dreamed of one day becoming a star. Sonny, on the other hand, was more experienced and worldly wise than Cher. He'd been married. He'd had a child. He was looking for a way to break out of a bad situation and break into a career as a successful singer and songwriter. And Cher's voice seemed to be the ticket. One day, Sonny asked Cher if it weren't about time for her to ask him to marry her. She chuckled, but there were problems. The couple had some challenges. Cher was underage. It would require her mother's signature to give consent for her marriage. That wasn't going to happen. Sonny, under California law, had to wait a full year after his divorce was final before he could legally marry, and his divorce wasn't even final yet. And they didn't have the money to do what everybody else did, which was to go to Mexico, spend a couple of days, then purchase a quickie wedding. They couldn't do it. So Sonny bought 2 silver rings at a souvenir shop, and he had Cher put on one and Sonny on the other in raised letters. They performed their own wedding ceremony in their apartment. Cher was the officiant, and they declared themselves married to everybody. They simply wore their rings for years and told people they had been married in Mexico. In August 1965, Sonny and Cher traveled to London. It was their first promotional tour. Their debut album, Look at Us, featured their #1 song, I Got You, Babe. They returned home amazed at the fans at the airport. They had adoring fans. They were a hit. But with that fame came a price. While they had money now and they had fans, they found themselves working a very heavy performance schedule. Cher writes in her memoir that Sonny became more and more possessive and more controlling. There was a time she wanted to go with her sister and a couple of the girlfriends to something like maybe a Tupperware party. He wouldn't let her go. He said she needed to be practicing or something. He very much became a control freak. Absolutely, in spite of that, she loved being a star. She writes of a number of special memories during that time when their fame was growing, and one of these involved a former First Lady of the United States. At the end of 1965, Sonny and Cher were invited to entertain at a private party in New York City at the Waldorf Astoria Towers. Jacqueline Kennedy was the guest of honor, and when her host asked her who she might like to invite, she astonished them by saying that if Sonny and Cher could perform, she would be delighted. The two performed for the first time in a home setting, always before he'd been on stage in a theater or arena. And then they joined the First Lady at her invitation and the others for dessert. Jackie told Cher that I Got You, Babe was a favorite of her 2 children who loved to dance while singing it. By 1968, Sonny had begun several casual flings with other women and was beginning to indulge in illicit drugs. Cher heard the rumors but chose to ignore them. By the end of 1968, she was pregnant with her and their first child. She was ordered by her doctor to rest for the first several months. Sonny insisted on a boy. He already had a girl. Cher insisted on a healthy baby. Several months before the baby was born, Sonny arranged to have a justice of the peace come to their home and conduct an extremely private official marriage ceremony. For the first time, the two were legally married. This is a picture of Sonny kissing Cher as she's well into labor and about to go into delivery. Their child was born in early March 1969, a 7-pound, perfectly healthy baby girl they named Chastity Sun. Cher was terrified at the thought of taking care of an infant. Sonny's only concern was that Cher's mother not interfere. The first night home, Cher awakened and discovered that Sonny had gone out. That absence underscored the distance that had developed between the two. 3 weeks after she gave birth, Cher had a second Vogue photo shoot with Richard Avedon. Sonny insisted that she fly to Arizona to do it because it would be good for business. The new family did its best to create a happy life, but there were just too many demons. Cher had become more than a pop star. Through Avedon's camera, Cher had become a Vogue model. Those who worked with her when she was modeling said she had the perfect model's body and was delightful to work with. Those who designed clothes for her said that she could wear anything and look stunning. Over the decades, she's proved just how true that is. In August of 1970, Vogue finally published the photos of Cher that Avedon had taken. Shortly after their baby was born, Sonny hit Cher with more bad news. Not only did he leave her the first night she's home with a baby that she's terrified of keeping, but he continues to play around. And then not too long after the baby was born, he confessed to her that they owed $227,000 in back taxes to the IRS and that they didn't have the money to pay it. They would have to go on tour, on the road again. He said, according to the memoir, "So that's how things are, Cher. There's nothing left to do but start again." And Cher's response, 2 years, only 2 years. They worked harder than ever, made their money back in those 2 years, paid off their debts, and had never had things financially better. But Cher was miserable. She writes in the memoir, "There I was, 26 years old, in what had been a loveless marriage. Sonny had given me the vehicle and the confidence to become the somebody my mother always told me I would be, and then he just lost interest." February 74, Sonny filed for an official separation. 1 week later, Cher filed for divorce, citing, quote, "involuntary servitude," slavery, as the cause. Each tried to have their own shows, but the magic was in their combination. They reunited on a professional basis to do the Sonny and Cher show, and that marked the first time that a divorced couple had starred in a television series together. Cher was determined to step out of Sonny's shadow and, more importantly, out of his control. In 1967, costume designer Bob Mackie had begun working extensively with Cher. Mackie created Cher's signature daring stage and fashion looks. Remember those Barbies wearing all the Mackie outfits? Cher and Bob Mackie attended the Met Gala in 1974. She wore one of Mackie's original designs that he called the Nude Illusion gown. In March 1975, she wore it again, this time on Time magazine's cover. In 1975, just days after her divorce from Bono was finalized, Cher married Greg Allman of the Allman Brothers Band. She filed for divorce 9 days later. The pair reconciled, and Cher welcomed their first child together, a son, Elijah Blue, in July of 1976. Cher and Allman would eventually divorce in 1979, but not before releasing an album together as Allman and Woman. She didn't want her name on it. To the hard way. Allman had a devastating drug habit, and he tried In the book, she explains in detail how hard he tried to kick it, and he just couldn't. Cher was 30 when Elijah Blue was born, and she was 33 when she was divorced for the second time. She moved close once again to her mother. Her mother has really been the one continuum in her life, and the two remained dear to each other until Georgia died in 2022. This is a picture of Cher, and it's a rare picture of Cher with her mother and her sister, Georgiann. You'll see the mom and G are the two blondes, and Cher is the dark. Georgia was very proud of both of these daughters. G became a successful actress in television shows, including General Hospital, Happy Days, and the Streets of San Francisco. And she was gorgeous. Moving away from the memoir, we look ahead to 1987, when Cher had no fewer than 3 high-profile movies at the box office: The Witches of Eastwick, co-starring Jack Nicholson, Susan Sarandon, and Michelle Pfeiffer; Suspect, co-starring Dennis Quaid, and Moonstruck. She won Best Actress for Moonstruck. It was a fitting moment for a woman who had worked so hard and who had survived countless challenges. But there's much more to Cher's story. To learn the rest of Cher's story, we're going to have to wait till November 18th, 2025, the announced publication date of Cher, Memoir Part 2. I, for one, cannot wait to get my hands on it.